Richard Pryor was laughing when he walked through the curtain. That unmistakable laugh, high-pitched and wild. The laugh that had made him the most successful comedian in America. The audience at NBC Studios erupted the moment they saw him. Standing ovation before he even reached Johnny's desk. 300 people on their feet, applauding, cheering, some of them crying. It had been 3 years since the fire. 3 years since Richard Pryor had doused himself in rum and lit a match. 3 years since he had run down Parthenia Street in Los Angeles, his body engulfed in flames, screaming for help. 3 years since the doctor said he would never perform again, never walk again, never be Richard Pryor again. But here he was, walking, smiling, laughing. Johnny Carson stood from behind his desk, something he rarely did for any guest. He walked toward Richard with his arms open, and the two men embraced in the center of the stage. The applause grew louder. The moment stretched, and when they finally separated, Johnny had tears in his eyes. "My God, Richard, look at you." "Look at me?" "Look at you, Johnny. You got old while I was gone." The audience exploded with laughter. This was the Richard Pryor they remembered. Quick, sharp, fearless. The burns on his face and hands were visible, the skin graft still healing, but his spirit seemed untouched. He moved to the guest chair with only a slight limp, settled in, and flashed that famous smile. "It's good to be back, Johnny. Real good. It's good to have you back. We were worried about you." "Worried? Man, I was worried about me too. You know how scary it is to wake up in a hospital and the first face you see is a priest." I said, "Father, am I dead?" He said, "No, but you're close." I said, "Then what the hell are you doing here? Get me a doctor, not a travel agent." The audience roared. Johnny laughed, that genuine Carson laugh that meant he was truly amused, not just performing. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt normal. Richard told jokes about the hospital, about the nurses, about the physical therapy. He did impressions of his doctors. He made fun of his own scars. It was vintage Pryor. Brilliant, unfiltered, taking the worst moment of his life and turning it into comedy gold. But Johnny noticed something. Behind the jokes, behind the laughter, behind 40 years of practice at making pain funny, there was something else in Richard's eyes. Something darker. Something waiting. Johnny had interviewed thousands of people in his career. He knew when someone was performing and when someone was present. Richard Pryor was performing, masterfully. But he wasn't present, not yet. During the first commercial break, Richard's hands started shaking. Not a lot, just a tremor. Johnny saw it. The makeup artist rushed over to touch up Richard's face, and Richard waved her away with a joke, but his hands kept shaking. "You okay?" Johnny asked quietly, off mic. Richard looked at him. For just a moment, the mask slipped. "Ask me what really happened, Johnny, when we go back on. Ask me what really happened that night." Johnny frowned. "Richard, are you sure? We don't have to." "I'm sure. I've been waiting 3 years to tell someone the truth. And if I don't do it now, I never will." The commercial ended. The cameras went live. The audience settled back into their seats, expecting more laughter, more impressions, more of the Richard Pryor show. Johnny looked at his note cards, then pushed them aside. The gesture that everyone who watched The Tonight Show had come to recognize. Something unscripted was about to happen. "Richard, can I ask you something serious?" "Uh-oh. Johnny Carson getting serious. Everybody hold on to your drinks." The audience chuckled, but there was tension in the air now. They could feel it. That night, June 9th, 1980, the papers said it was a freebase accident. They said you were using drugs and there was an explosion. But I've known you for 15 years, Richard, and something about that story never made sense to me. Richard's smile faded. Not completely, but enough that the audience noticed. The energy in the studio shifted. "What do you want to know, Johnny?" "I want to know what really happened." Richard was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, an eternity in television. The audience held their breath. "You know what freebase is, Johnny?" "I know what the papers say it is." "The papers don't know shit." Richard's voice had changed, harder, rawer. Freebase is cocaine that's been cooked down. You smoke it. It hits you faster, harder. And for about 30 seconds, you feel like God. Then the 30 seconds end, and you realize you're not God. You're just a junkie with a pipe in your hand and nothing in your soul. The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't comedy. This was confession. I'd been freebasing for about 2 years by then. Every day, sometimes all day. I'd do a show, go home, smoke until I passed out, wake up, smoke some more. I lost track of time, lost track of money, lost track of everything that mattered. Johnny listened without interrupting. His face showed no judgment, only attention. That night, June 9th, I was in my house in Northridge, alone. I'd been smoking for maybe 16 hours straight. I don't remember exactly. Time gets funny when you're that high. And I was sitting there with the pipe and the lighter, and I looked at myself in the mirror. Richard paused. His hands were shaking again, more visibly now. Do you know what I saw, Johnny? What did you see? Nothing. I saw nothing. I looked in that mirror, and the man looking back at me was empty. No joy, no pain, no hope, no fear, just nothing. 40 years of life, and I had become nothing. A woman in the third row started crying softly, and something broke inside me. Something that had been cracking for a long time finally just shattered, and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. Richard Pryor, the funniest man in America, is going to die alone in a house full of drugs, and nobody will even be surprised. Johnny leaned forward. Richard, let me finish, Johnny. I've never told anyone this. Not the doctors, not my family, nobody. But I need to say it out loud, or it's going to kill me. The audience was frozen. The camera operators had stopped moving. Even the stage crew, who had seen everything in their years at NBC, stood motionless. The papers said it was an accident. They said the freebase exploded. They said I was a victim of my own addiction. Richard looked directly at Johnny. His eyes were wet. It wasn't an accident, Johnny. I poured rum over my body. I soaked myself in it, and then I lit the match myself, on purpose, because I wanted to die. The audience gasped. Several people cried out. Johnny's face went pale. I stood there in my living room covered in flames, and for about 3 seconds I felt relief. Finally, it was going to be over. 40 years of pain, 40 years of pretending, 40 years of making everyone laugh while I was dying inside. It was finally going to end. Richard's voice cracked, but he kept going. But then something happened. My body started running. I didn't tell it to run. It just ran, out the door, down the street, screaming. And I realized that I didn't actually want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop. And there's a difference, Johnny. There's a big difference. Johnny couldn't speak. His hand moved across the desk and gripped Richard's arm, anchoring him, letting him know he wasn't alone. A cop car found me on Parthenia Street. I'd run almost a mile, burning the whole time. The cops thought I was a crazy man on fire. They didn't know it was Richard Pryor. They just saw a human being who needed help, and they helped me. They wrapped me in their jackets and put out the flames and called an ambulance. And I remember lying there on the pavement, looking up at the sky, thinking, I'm still alive, and I don't know why. The studio was absolutely silent. 300 people, not a sound. The weight of Richard's words pressed down on everyone. I had third-degree burns over 50% of my body. The doctors gave me a 30% chance of survival. But you know what? 30% is better than 0, and 0 is what I had before I lit that match. Because when you're that deep in addiction, when you're that lost in your own darkness, you're already dead. You're just waiting for your body to catch up. Johnny finally found his voice. It was barely a whisper. Richard, why? Why did you want to die? Richard looked at him, and for the first time in the interview, he wasn't performing at all. He was just a man, broken and honest and desperately seeking understanding. Because I'd spent my whole life making people laugh so they wouldn't see how much I was hurting. And eventually the performance became a prison. I couldn't stop being funny. I couldn't stop being Richard Pryor, even when I was alone, even when I was crying, Even when I was dying inside, I had to keep the show going. And that night, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't carry the weight of being Richard Pryor for one more second. Johnny's eyes were filled with tears. But you're here now. You survived. I survived, but not because of the doctors, not because of the skin grafts or the surgeries or the physical therapy. I survived because of something that happened in that burn unit. What happened? Richard took a shaky breath. There was a kid in the room next to mine. A little boy, maybe 8 years old. He'd been burned in a house fire, real bad. Worse than me. And every night I could hear him crying. Not screaming, just crying. This soft, broken crying that went on for hours. The audience leaned in, captivated. One night, about 2 weeks after they brought me in, the nurses wheeled me past his room. And I saw him for the first time. This little kid, bandages all over his body, lying there alone. And I asked the nurse, "Where are his parents?" She said, "They died in the fire. He's alone." Richard wiped his eyes roughly. I made them wheel me into his room. I didn't know what I was going to say. I could barely talk. My face was still half bandaged. But I looked at that little boy. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you Richard Pryor?" A sad smile crossed Richard's face. I said, "Yeah, I'm Richard Pryor." And he said, "My daddy used to watch your movies. He said you were the funniest man in the world." And I said, "Well, I don't feel very funny right now." And this little boy, this 8-year-old kid who had lost everything, who had burns worse than mine, looked at me and said, "That's okay. You don't have to be funny. You just have to be here." The audience was weeping openly now. Johnny had tears streaming down his face. "You just have to be here. That's what an 8-year-old boy taught me. You don't have to perform. You don't have to entertain. You don't have to be anything for anybody. You just have to be here, present, alive. That's enough." Richard's voice broke completely. I spent every day of my recovery in that little boy's room. I'd tell him stories. Not jokes. Real stories. About my childhood. About my grandmother. About all the pain I'd been hiding my whole life. And he'd listen. And sometimes he'd cry. And sometimes I'd cry. And we'd just be there together. Two burned-up people keeping each other alive. Johnny spoke softly. "What happened to him?" Richard smiled. A real smile this time. "He made it. He's out there somewhere right now, 12 years old, living with a foster family who loves him. I paid for all his surgeries, all his therapy, everything, and I visit him every month. He's the reason I'm alive, Johnny. Not the doctors, not the drugs. That little boy." The audience erupted into applause, but it wasn't the usual Tonight Show applause. It was something deeper, more emotional, the sound of 300 people who had just witnessed something sacred. Johnny stood up from his desk. He walked around and sat on the edge of the guest chair, right next to Richard. The cameras scrambled to adjust. "Richard, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "I've been honest with you for the last 10 minutes, Johnny. Why stop now? Are you okay? Really okay? Not performing okay? Really okay?" Richard looked at Johnny for a long moment. The audience waited. "No, I'm not okay. I'm not going to lie to you or anyone else anymore. I'm still fighting. Every day is a fight. The addiction doesn't go away just because you almost die. It waits. It whispers. It tells you that one more hit won't hurt. That nobody really cares. That you're still worthless, still empty, still nothing." He took a breath. "But here's what I've learned, Johnny. The addiction lies. It's a liar. And every day I stay clean, every day I wake up and choose to be here, I'm calling that lie what it is. I'm not winning the war, but I'm winning today. And today is all any of us have." Johnny put his hand on Richard's shoulder. "You just did something braver than anything you've ever done on stage, Richard. Braver than any movie. Braver than any stand-up routine. You told the truth. The truth is all I've got left, Johnny. The drugs took everything else. My money, my marriages, my health. but they couldn't take the truth. And as long as I've got that, I've got a chance. Johnny turned to the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say something, and I want everyone watching at home to hear this clearly. What Richard just did took more courage than most of us will ever have. He told the truth about the worst moment of his life, not for sympathy, not for publicity, but because he knows that somewhere out there, someone is sitting alone in their darkness, thinking about ending it all. He looked directly into the lens. If that's you, if you're watching this right now and you're in that place, I want you to listen to what Richard said. You don't have to be funny. You don't have to perform. You just have to be here. Call someone. Anyone. Tell them the truth. Let them help you. Because your life matters. Your presence matters. You being here right now watching this matters. Richard spoke up. And if you've got nobody to call me. I'm serious. I'm in the phone book. Richard Pryor, Los Angeles. Call me. Because I've been where you are. I've lit that match. And I'm still here. Which means you can be here too. The audience was on their feet again, not applauding, just standing, honoring, witnessing. Johnny made a decision in that moment. He turned to his producer off camera. We're done for tonight. Cancel the rest of the show. The producer started to protest, but Johnny cut him off with a look. This is more important than any other segment we could possibly do. Richard and I are going to sit here and talk. Really talk. And anyone who wants to leave can leave. But this conversation isn't over. Nobody left. Not a single person. For the next 47 minutes, Johnny Carson and Richard Pryor had the most honest conversation ever broadcast on American television. They talked about addiction, about depression, about the masks people wear, about the price of fame, about the loneliness that comes with making millions of people laugh while you're dying inside. Richard talked about his childhood in a brothel in Peoria, Illinois, where his grandmother ran a prostitution business and his mother was one of the workers. He talked about being molested at 6 years old, about using humor to survive, about building a wall of jokes so high that nobody could ever climb over it to see the broken child hiding underneath. Johnny, in a rare moment of vulnerability, talked about his own struggles, his 3 divorces, his difficult relationships with his sons, the loneliness that came with being America's late-night companion while going home to an empty house. People think because you're on TV, you've got everything figured out, Johnny said. They don't realize that the screen is just another mask, another way to hide. That's why I had to tell the truth tonight, Johnny, because I'm tired of hiding. I've been hiding my whole life. And where did it get me? On fire in the middle of the street, hoping to die. That's where hiding gets you. As the show was finally ending, Richard made one last request. Johnny, can I say something to the people at home? Just one more thing? Of course. Richard looked into the camera. His face, scarred and healing, was wet with tears. His voice was rough from an hour of raw emotion, but his eyes were clear, present, alive. If you're hurting tonight, I see you. I know what it feels like to want the pain to stop. I know what it feels like to think that death is the only way out. But I'm here to tell you, from the other side of that fire, that it's not true. The pain can stop without you stopping. The darkness can lift. It doesn't feel like it when you're in it. I know. Believe me, I know. But there's a little boy somewhere who taught me something important. You don't have to be funny. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to be anything. You just have to be here. So please, stay. Stay one more night, one more hour, one more minute. Because that minute might be the one where everything changes. It was for me. The screen faded to black on Richard Pryor's face, scarred and beautiful and full of hard-won hope. The broadcast ended, but the impact was just beginning. NBC's switchboards crashed within 15 minutes. Calls poured in from across the country. People thanking Richard for his honesty. People sharing their own stories. People saying they had been about to give up, but Richard's words had stopped them. Crisis hotlines reported a 300% increase in calls that night. Not suicide attempts, calls for help, people reaching out instead of giving up. The National Institute on Drug Abuse later credited that Tonight Show appearance with changing how America talked about addiction. Before Richard Pryor's confession, addiction was seen as a moral failure, a weakness, something to be ashamed of. After that night, it started to be seen as what it truly was: a disease, a treatable disease, a survivable disease. Richard Pryor performed for another decade after that interview. He developed multiple sclerosis in 1986, which slowly took away his ability to walk, to stand, to perform. But he never stopped telling the truth. In every interview, every conversation, every moment he had left, he was honest about his struggles. He died on December 10th, 2005, at his home in Los Angeles. He was 65 years old. Johnny Carson delivered a statement that was read on news broadcasts across the country. Richard Pryor was the bravest man I ever met. Not because he was funny, because he was honest. In a world that rewards performance, Richard had the courage to be real. He showed us his scars inside and out, and in doing so, he gave millions of people permission to show their own. The world lost a comedian today. But more importantly, we lost a teacher, a man who taught us that surviving isn't about being strong. It's about being present. It's about being here. And Richard, wherever you are now, I hope you know, you were here. You mattered. And we're all better for it. At Richard's memorial service, they played a clip from that 1983 Tonight Show interview. The moment where the little boy's words came through Richard's broken voice. You don't have to be funny. You just have to be here. The audience, filled with Hollywood legends and everyday people whose lives Richard had touched, wept together. Because sometimes the funniest people are the ones carrying the most pain. And sometimes the bravest thing a comedian can do is stop making jokes and start telling the truth. Richard Pryor lit himself on fire hoping to end his suffering. Instead, he survived to illuminate a path for millions of others trapped in their own darkness. That's not comedy. That's grace. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who might be struggling tonight. Drop a comment about a time when someone's honesty saved you. And remember what Richard Pryor learned in that burn unit. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be strong. You don't have to be anything for anybody. You just have to be here. That's enough. That's always been enough.